Hello everybody, this is MotherShip here, and I'm going to be doing another review today. This time of the infamous Warriors of the Deep, the follow-up to the one I reviewed last time, the Sea Devils. Now this is the second Sea Devil and as of now last Sea Devil story in Doctor Who until just a few days later when we're going to get Legend of the Sea Devils. And it was the last Silurian episode for classic Doctor Who, so it's a pretty important one. However, for the most part it's been forgotten by most of the fandom. So let's dive right into this review, pun partially intended. So the plot is that we're on a sea base in the late 21st century, the 2080s. And it's a human sea base. Now, the humans at this point are in a horrible civil war. So there's tons of spies for other human factions. And Silurians are landing and they want to take the base and provoke a war between both human factions that'll kill them both so that they can reassert themselves on the planet. Now, first thing I want to mention is this is a great concept for a story, very different to this previous Sea Devil and Silurian story we've gotten so far, and anything we've gotten in Doctor Who, even kind of to this day. The general aesthetic of the sea base on the outside in the model shots is very reminiscent of the more recent episode After the Flood and everything, and Before the Flood, from Peter Capaldi's Series 9. And that episode had a great aesthetic, so that's a good thing. However, now I'm talking about the Sea Devils' representation here. They are not written well. This is mostly a Silurian story. And I'm fine with it being mostly a Silurian story, but pick if you want the Silurian or Sea Devil story. If you want both, you're going to have them work together. However, for this entire story, the Sea Devils do nothing but stand in the background and shoot the people the Silurian in the end tell them to shoot. Sure, the Sea Devils do lead their whole army onto the sea base, but they're just being given orders. As a matter of fact, not one Sea Devil seems to be on the same rank as Nycta, the leader Silurian, and I'll get to him in a moment. And that's just really sad. The Sea Devils were portrayed really well in the last Sea Devil story. And even though their design looks a bit less goofy here, it's a bit less lovable as well. In some places it doesn't actually look as good. It doesn't look as goofy because it's not that detailed and ambitious, but certain details that are lacking make it look really boring. For example, the entirely black colour scheme. It fits with the samurai armour, but the samurai armour itself doesn't look that good, and the idea of Sea Devils, which had a great aesthetic in terms of costumes last time, now they're wearing samurai armour? Seriously? However, I do enjoy the redesigned guns. That is a big plus for me. They just look like the originals, but kind of better, and they do fit in with the armour. However, these new Sea Devils, they are firstly lacking the frills on the back of the head like the old ones. And that didn't even look cheap, so I don't get why you'd remove that. The originals had this weird bone structure on their heads that looked quite good. And the eyes are gone, they're just much smaller and less cool looking, less noticeable. And on the neck, unlike the previous one, now I do like the neck a bit. It kind of puffs up and it does look alright, but sometimes it just looks way too big, and any time a Sea Devil in this is not wearing its armour, it looks absolutely ridiculous. So now onto the Silurians. For the most part, they're portrayed well here. It's kind of annoying that they just overshadow the Sea Devils in every possible aspect, but for the most part, they're alright. However, one of my problems is Nycta. So Nycta is a returning Sea Devil character, and he was basically one of the main villains, depending on how you see it, the main villain of the first and previous Silurian story, depending on how you look at it. However, in that, his base got bombarded and him and all the Silurians were killed, and it made for a good tragic ending and rounded off the episode in a good way. But here he's back. The Silurians are back. Why are they back? Well, we don't have any explanation at all. They are. They're just back. And it kind of actually ruins the ending of the Silurians. What was a pretty great story, not my favourite, too long, which should have been a 4-parter, but yeah, good. Just actually got torn down by this one with him returning. And on paper, I don't have the biggest problem with him returning, or even the triad, but it's executed with such little care and in such a boring way that honestly I just prefer if it hadn't happened and we got a whole new Silurian antagonist. Now, on to the music. Now, this is possibly the biggest up for me compared to the Sea Devils. In the Sea Devils, the music was barely even considerably music. It was boring. Well, not exactly boring. It was just kind of confusing, strange, in some ways psychedelic, and not really music. However, in this one, it's honestly got one of my favourite soundtracks of Classic Who. Multiple of the tracks for the Silurians, when they're in their base at the beginning, is really, really good. It sets a great underwater, murky, mysterious, ominous atmosphere. And you really get pulled into the story by it, unlike the Sea Devils. So that's a big win. There's also just tons of amazing tracks of the Sea Devils and Silurians attacking the base. So overall, I'd give the track a 9 out of 10. It doesn't really falter at any point, and there's no real problem with it. And then you get to the Merca, and the Merca looks alright. The head looks great, but you can tell, with the lower half, let's just say you can tell it's just 2 people walking around. The lower half just looks like a rubber suit with 4 legs. The top half looks like a well thought out and designed monster with detail. You've got 1/4 of it looking good and the rest looking terrible, really. That's all I have to say about it. It gets killed off quite quickly. However, the pacing, it does help along the pacing. It gives you something to view and get engaged in during the 4-part story. And this actually might be a little too short for 4 parts. I do still like the pacing. I still think it's paced well and I don't get bored or sidetracked at any point. But some parts just don't get enough time to develop. And especially because they decided to bring back the triad, the Silurian triad, and Nycta. The idea that we're just going to get them back, but we're not going to devote at least 5 parts to at least explaining that. We could have gotten rid of the Merca and just spent the rest of it on Nycta, and I would have been completely fine with that. But yeah, the Merca gets killed off in an unceremonious way as well. Oh, and by the way, this scene, it's stupid. Girl, you could have just turned around and run, but you had to karate kick it. What did you think that was going to get you? Anyway, so then we have my biggest downside, and that is the human spies. You've got these human antagonists, and they take up about half of the story, and they just make it way more convoluted and over the top than it needs to be. I feel like it should have just been the Silurians and Sea Devils trying to provoke a war between the humans. But we had to get this kind of boring spy espionage subplot that didn't even go that far. Every person who was a member of it got killed off in either some unceremonious or surprisingly boring way. Like, for example, I forgot his name, but the guy who was leading the whole thing, first in command of the sea base, he just gets killed off at the end of part 3, and in the end, he could have contributed more to the story. And I know they contributed a lot to the story. They did. It's just, you come away feeling underwhelmed. And by the end of the story, you feel like, really? We spent about the entire story working on them, and they just die. And it doesn't actually go anywhere. Extremely disappointing. And I feel like some Base Under Siege, but under humans, kind of like a Patrick Troughton story, but with humans, would have been much better. Now, the way the Sea Devils and Silurians are defeated is actually quite good, in my opinion, and better than the way they were defeated, certainly, in the Sea Devils. Because they are killed with, I think it's hepestrazine gas or whatever, and it's toxic to all reptilian life, and it just basically melts them away, which is a bit of a trope of the 5th Doctor era. Yes, I am looking at you, Time Flight. But that's actually a good message about, the abuse of the environment. And it actually still holds up really well today. I came into this story, and I came out of it thinking, wow, they really handled killing off the Sea Devils and Silurians very well. It really feels like it fits into the modern day political atmosphere, and it doesn't feel like it's out of touch like some other classic Who episodes sometimes tend to feel, because, that's from the 60s, 70s, 80s, they get dated. This hasn't dated. Sadly, sadly it hasn't dated. That says a bit about our society, but overall it was done well, and the Doctor really wanting to find another solution but having no choice until they die was sad. Even the way he got Turlo and Tegan to care for the Sea Devils and Silurians, but they just couldn't, and they died anyway, was really good. And the final line of the episode, "There should have been a better way," was brilliant. So that's all I really have to say about this one. I realise that I went on for much longer than I did about the Sea Devils, because honestly, much more controversial, and there's a bit more to say. Overall, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. Underrated, actually. Not as good as the Sea Devils. I know it's only 1 point lower, but that 1 point has huge differences. One of the main saving graces of the story itself is the music. I really enjoy the music, and it's one of my favourite tracks in Classic Who, but apart from that, it's not actually too remarkable, and it's not one of the first stories you think of when you think of 5th Doctor era or 80s Doctor Who, which is a shame because it was the send-off for the Silurians and Sea Devils. So that's all I really have to say on it. It was good, but sadly no better. So that so far rounds up this series, but not really, because in just 3 days from recording this, and by the time this is uploaded, probably only 1 day, we're gonna get the next, after about 40 years, Sea Devil story, and I am super excited, and I'm going to be reviewing that as soon as possible. So I hope everybody enjoyed, and I'll see you for Legend of the Sea Devils.